What are some of the at a grassroots level when we're talking about issues that are being dealt with, like for example, Musawa or all of this? w- Sometimes these conversations can be quite abstract,
Mm.
and hence it becomes quite contentious. But clearly, Musawa, or when you talk about Islamic feminism, is dealing with a lived reality. There are concerns
Yeah,
that need to be addressed. There's a
right.
feeling. What are these concerns? I mean, just to
Yeah.
so what are some of these concerns that are being dealt with as a lived reality?
Yeah, I mean, so there are these two dimensions. So there's the Islamic feminist part that has to do with scholarship, production of academic knowledge, books, and so on, based on many years of research and so on. And then there's the other level where some of these scholar activists are like, for example, part of Musawa, focusing on Muslim family law. So uh, some of the concerns are specifically, for example, the issue of child marriage, the issue of unequal right to divorce, the issue of a very important issue is the guardianship, parenting, parental roles. So it's still in many countries. It's based on the classical fiqh model where parenting is seen in a gendered way. The father is the wali, the mother is the hadina. Now, sometimes even before the marriage breaks down, problems arise because of that model, because it doesn't reflect reality. So if a mother wants to open account for her bank account for her their child, or needs to transfer the child from one school to the other, even when the marriage is still established, she has to get
Permission.
permission from the husband, and which complicates things. And then the assumption also is like, for example, let's say in Egypt, the assumption is it's the father who is only primarily in charge of the education, the moral upbringing. Of course, the father has a big role to play, but it doesn't. And also that he has no role to play in the physical care, in the nurturing care. And first of all, that
So it's like a
does
binary almost. Yeah.
exactly, and that is in our
Right.
classical fiqh.
Right.
But that, on the one hand, it is not in the best interest of the children, number one. And a lot of empirical work has proven that. And number two, it makes the day-to-day parenting of children very, very difficult, extremely difficult. And then if there's a divorce, and it's an acrimonious divorce,
Mm.
yeah, it becomes even more difficult, because if the mother is the custodial, and usually that's the case, and depending on which school they follow, right, for a certain number of years, then and if they don't have a good relationship, then she cannot really parent or take care of that child without the. So, for example, in Egypt, they did a little bit of changes where the custodial divorced mother has educational guardianship, but not everything, right? So she can manage the educational affairs of her children, but not other things. Like if there's an emergency and they need to, have a medical issue, she can't deal with that. And if the relationship is
So
acrimonious,
it's literally waiting for the father. If there was a medical issue, the mother wouldn't really have a.
yes, yes.
And is that a legal thing, or is that more from a?
It is in the law,
Yeah.
but the law reflects the fiqh model.
Right. Of course.
The
Of
fixed model.
course.
And the weird thing is, so there's this scholar called Ibrahim Fikri. His name is Ibrahim Fikri, Ahmed Ibrahim Fikri, and he was based in University of Toronto. I don't know where he is, but he did this excellent work where he looked at before the nation state in Egypt. How people managed their affairs of parenting their children. And he noticed that a lot of these parents, although in theory, the fiqh book says, your father, you are the wali, the mother, you are the hadina. But actually, these judges, they
Is this
had
is this pre-modernity we're talking about?
we're
Yeah.
talking about 16th century,
Okay.
up to, I believe it was 17. It was before the nation state, and it was Ottoman period, but there was,
Right.
and no codified, right? So the parents would go to the court and they would agree on arrangements where, sometimes the father would have the child, he would take it, and this is if they're divorced, or the mother would do it. It was much, much more flexible, and the judges took into account what worked for a family, right? And he reviewed these court practices, these deeds, especially with the Ottomans, we have a wealth of these historical records. And he found also the same thing that some of our fuqaha also, revisited this idea of very gendered, divided parental roles. The father is the wali, the mother is the hadina. So even in our fiqh, there are these ideas and practices and legal opinions that allow for revisiting the question.
And these are legal judgments. These are actual practical legal judgments that would happen in a Sharia court in the 16th or 17th century. And it's a lot more nuanced. It's not...
Exactly. And even some fiqh opinions, even in the books, they were willing to go there. But what happens in the modern period is that not many people have knowledge of that nuances and that changes and the differences among the fuqaha, right? Of course, they had a patriarchal model. That's okay. But they had in mind also the interest of the family and the lived realities, and they were flexible, and there was room for a difference. Whereas what happens now when it becomes part of a state law,
because it's codified, right? At that point,
exactly. It is state law. It is codified. You don't have that space for al-ikhtilaf, and it is enforced through state machinery, and the other layer of
so it's just a bit ironic though. So we're saying in pre-modernity it's a lot more flexible than after in some ways. Because it wasn't codified. So it would be a case of somebody going to a qadi, having this issue, and the qadi would look at the situation, and there would be a nuance in how the qadi would judge. Whereas now, because it's codified, it's a lot more restrictive.
Exactly.
That's quite interesting.
Exactly. And then also the nature of the fiqh changes.
Yeah.
The nature of the fiqh, because Islamic law, also Islamic legal tradition, is multidimensional. So you have the fatwa, you have these court cases, and then the fuqaha, as we know, also had no problem revisiting their opinions. So so you had Malki jurists in Egypt disagreeing with their counterparts, Malki jurists in Medina, because Egypt required something else. And they had no problem with that. And we have historical records that show that. Like one example is how sadaq is paid. Should it be, in Egypt, there's been this practice of prompt and deferred dower, right? Whereas some of these Malki jurists in Medina would say, hey, you can't do that. Dower isn't, it's due to the wife. The marriage is concluded. She gets her dower. But in Egypt, because it was also farming, sometimes people could not have the husband have that ready. So there was a part that was deferred.